Have you ever wondered how much strength it takes to keep going when life keeps knocking you down? Meet the Thompsons, a family who knows this struggle all too well. Life wasn't always easy for them, but they had one thing that kept them going: their home. A modest 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown building wasn't much, but to the Thompsons, it was their sanctuary, their place of hope. John, a factory worker, and Maria, a part-time seamstress, worked tirelessly to provide for their 2 young children, Emma and Jack. Every dollar was stretched, every meal planned carefully. Their lives revolved around one principle: giving their kids a future better than their own. But when John's factory announced layoffs and Maria's health took a sudden turn, their already fragile finances collapsed. The rent they once managed to scrape together became an impossible mountain to climb. As bills piled up and overdue notices flooded their mailbox, the Thompsons faced a terrifying reality: they might lose their home. They begged their landlord for more time, explaining their situation, but he only saw numbers, not people. For him, it was a business decision, not a moral one. But what happens next? That's where the real story begins. Stay with us until the end, because what the Thompsons achieve will leave you inspired and prove that resilience and determination can rewrite any story even when the odds are stacked against you. Now, let's dive into the events that set this extraordinary journey in motion. If the Thompsons were the heart of the story, then the landlord, Mr. Donovan, was its shadow. A man of wealth and stature, Donovan prided himself on being a self-made success, but to those who knew him, his success came with a cost: a complete lack of compassion. Donovan owned several properties across the city, each managed with an iron fist. He wasn't the kind of landlord who would stop to listen to his tenants' struggles. To him, tenants were merely dollar signs, and his buildings were cash machines. When the Thompsons fell behind on their rent, Donovan barely batted an eye. Their heartfelt letters and requests for an extension were met with cold indifference. "It's not my problem," he said to his assistant, tossing aside yet another letter from Maria. "If they can't pay, they can't stay." For Donovan, it was a simple calculation: evict the family and find new tenants who could pay on time. He issued the eviction notice without hesitation, certain that he had made the right business move. What he didn't realize was that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would turn his world upside down. Donovan's lack of empathy wasn't just a flaw, it was his blind spot. And as you'll soon see, blind spots have a way of coming back to haunt us. What happens when the tables turn? Stick around, because this story is about to take an unexpected twist. Let's move on to the moment that changed everything for the Thompsons: the eviction notice. It was a crisp autumn morning when the knock came at the Thompsons' door. Maria, clutching her sewing needle, rushed to answer, her heart already heavy with dread. Standing there was a man in a suit, clipboard in hand, avoiding her eyes as he handed her a letter. She knew what it was before she even opened it. Effective immediately, the letter began, "You are required to vacate the premises within 30 days due to non-payment of rent." Maria's hands trembled as she read the words aloud to John. Their children, Emma and Jack, looked on from the corner of the room, too young to fully grasp what was happening but old enough to sense their parents' fear. Desperation took over. That evening, Maria and John went to Donovan's office to plead their case. They waited in the dimly lit lobby, their children sitting quietly beside them. When Donovan finally appeared, he looked at them with an air of impatience. "We just need a little more time," Maria began, her voice shaking. "We've been here for years. We've always paid on time before. Please, just a few more weeks." Donovan leaned back in his chair, his face devoid of any sympathy. "Business is business," he replied flatly. "If I make an exception for you, I'd have to do it for everyone. I'm sorry, but you'll need to leave." Sorry. The word hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. As they walked out of his office, the weight of their reality pressed down on them. They had nowhere to go, no plan, and only a handful of days to figure it out. But what Donovan didn't know, and what even the Thompsons couldn't foresee, was that this wasn't the end of their story. This was just the beginning of a remarkable transformation, one that would challenge everything Donovan believed about power and success. In the next part, we'll see how the Thompsons faced this crisis head-on, finding strength in places they never expected. Their journey is far from over, so keep watching to discover how they turned this moment of despair into a turning point. The day they left their apartment was one of the hardest the Thompsons had ever faced. With everything they owned packed into a few worn-out suitcases, they stepped out of the building that had been their home for years. The children clung to their parents, sensing the fear their brave faces couldn't fully hide. For the next few weeks, the Thompsons lived in survival mode. They found temporary refuge in a small shelter, sharing a single room with 3 other families. Privacy was a luxury, and the noise of crying babies and shuffling feet echoed through the cramped space. Emma and Jack, once carefree and full of laughter, now sat quietly, trying to adjust to the uncertainty around them. John spent his days walking from one end of the city to the other, applying for jobs wherever he could. Maria, still recovering from her illness, tried to contribute by sewing clothes for others in the shelter. Every penny they earned went towards saving for a place of their own, but progress was slow, and the days felt endless. Their situation was heartbreaking, but it was also eye-opening. The Thompsons began to notice how many other families were just like them, good people, hardworking and determined, yet struggling to stay afloat in a system that seemed designed to keep them down. One evening, as they huddled together on their shared cot, Maria looked at John and said, "We can't let this be the end for us. We have to fight back for Emma, for Jack, for ourselves." John nodded, the determination in her voice sparking a glimmer of hope in his own heart. It was in those moments of despair that the seeds of their comeback were planted. The Thompsons decided that no matter how hard things got, they would not give up. They didn't know how they would make it, but they knew one thing for sure: they would rebuild their lives, brick by brick. What came next was nothing short of extraordinary. In the face of relentless challenges, the Thompsons began to find their footing, step by step. Their journey of resilience and hope is about to take a surprising turn, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Stay tuned to see how this family turned their struggles into the foundation for a remarkable comeback. The next chapter will leave you inspired. When you're at your lowest, it's easy to give up, but for the Thompsons, giving up was never an option. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about proving to themselves and their children that no challenge could break them. John, despite his exhaustion, picked up not 1 but 2 jobs. By day, he worked as a construction laborer, and by night, he cleaned offices. The long hours left him bone-tired, but every paycheck brought them closer to stability. Meanwhile, Maria turned her talent for sewing into a small business. Using a borrowed sewing machine, she started mending clothes for others at the shelter and quickly built a reputation for her skill. The children, Emma and Jack, found ways to help too. Emma would sit with her mother, organizing fabric and threading needles, while Jack ran small errands to make things easier for his parents. Despite the hardships, their bond as a family grew even stronger. Every penny they earned was carefully saved, no matter how small. They cut every corner they could, skipping meals and walking instead of taking buses. Slowly but surely, their sacrifices began to pay off. They managed to move out of the shelter and into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, but to the Thompsons, it was a step forward. What kept them going wasn't just their hard work, it was their belief that brighter days were ahead. "We've been through the worst," Maria often said to John, her voice steady. "If we can survive this, we can do anything." That resilience became their driving force. With each passing day, they grew more determined to rise above their circumstances. What they didn't know yet was that their persistence would soon open doors they never imagined. Their journey was far from over, but the foundation of their comeback was firmly in place. The Thompsons were no longer just surviving, they were preparing to thrive. And as fate would have it, an unexpected opportunity was about to change everything. Stick around to see how this family's unwavering resolve set the stage for a life-changing moment. You won't believe the turn their story is about to take. Just when the Thompsons began to find their footing, a spark of hope appeared on the horizon, small at first, but powerful enough to reignite their dreams. It all started with Maria's sewing business. What began as simple repairs for shelter residents turned into a growing stream of loyal customers. Word of her skill spread, and soon she was creating custom dresses and suits for clients outside the shelter. One day, Maria received an offer that changed everything. A boutique owner was impressed by her designs and asked her to create an exclusive collection. The work was challenging, but Maria poured her heart into it. The pay was better than anything they had seen in years, and for the first time in a long while, the Thompsons started to save not just for survival, but for their future. Meanwhile, John's persistence at his construction job didn't go unnoticed. His supervisor, impressed by his work ethic, promoted him to a foreman position. The raise gave the family breathing room and allowed them to dream bigger. But the real breakthrough came when John overheard a conversation at work about a building going up for sale. The mention of the property caught his attention. It was the very building where they had once lived, where Donovan had evicted them without a second thought. The irony wasn't lost on John, but instead of bitterness, he felt a flicker of something else: opportunity. That night, he shared the news with Maria. "It's a long shot," he said, "but what if we could buy it? What if we could turn the place where we lost everything into the place where we rebuild everything?" Maria's eyes widened. It seemed impossible. They had some savings, but nowhere near enough to buy a building. Still, the idea refused to leave their minds. For weeks, they worked tirelessly to research loans, connect with financial advisors, and crunch numbers. The odds were against them, but the Thompsons had learned one thing in their struggle: impossible is just a word. Little did they know, this leap of faith would lead to the most incredible twist in their story. What happens when the family who was evicted becomes the one holding the keys? The answer will astonish you, so don't go anywhere. The best part is yet to come. Sometimes, life's greatest opportunities come disguised as challenges, and for the Thompsons, this was one of those moments. After weeks of researching and preparing, they discovered a shocking truth. The building where they had once lived, the place Donovan had used to evict them, was struggling financially. The same man who had tossed them out was now desperate to sell the property to cover his debts. The irony wasn't lost on John and Maria. "It feels like fate," Maria said, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. But the numbers were daunting. Even with their savings and Maria's growing business income, they didn't have enough to make the purchase outright. They needed a plan, and fast. John began meeting with lenders, pitching their vision for the building. He shared their story: how they had lived there, how they were evicted, and how they wanted to transform it into a place where tenants were treated with dignity. One lender, moved by their resilience, agreed to give them a chance. With a mix of savings, a small loan, and a leap of faith, the Thompsons managed to scrape together enough for the down payment. When the paperwork was finalized, they could hardly believe it. The building was theirs. It wasn't just a property. It was a symbol of everything they had endured and overcome. As they walked through the building for the first time as owners, memories flooded back. They saw the apartment where they had laughed, cried, and dreamed. But instead of feeling bitterness toward Donovan, they felt a deep sense of purpose. This building wasn't just about their family, it was about creating a better life for every tenant who called it home. The day Donovan handed over the keys was a moment neither of them would forget. His face, once smug and self-assured, was now etched with disbelief. "How?" he muttered, unable to finish the question. John simply smiled and said, "We believed in what you didn't." What came next would change not only the Thompsons' lives but the lives of everyone in the building. Stay tuned to see how this family turned their newfound ownership into a beacon of hope and a lesson in redemption. The story isn't over yet. The best is still to come. The Smiths soon learned that Mr. Harper's building was up for sale, and the news spread like wildfire. With his finances in shambles and the building in a state of neglect, he had no choice but to sell. For the Smiths, it was more than just a property. It was the very place they had once called home, a place that had been ripped away from them in a moment of desperation. The thought of owning it, of reclaiming what was lost, was both thrilling and unsettling. Despite their modest savings, the Smiths saw an opportunity to do something more than just buy a building. They saw a chance to rebuild not just a structure, but a community that had been abandoned by Mr. Harper's greed. With the help of their business investor, they managed to secure the necessary funds. The decision was made: they would buy the building. As the paperwork was signed, there was a sense of triumph in the air, mixed with the weight of the past. The memories of being forced out were still raw, but now, they were in control. They weren't just victims of circumstance anymore. They were about to become the new landlords. What Mr. Harper had seen as a mere transaction, the Smiths saw as a symbol of their hard-earned victory. It was a chance to right the wrongs and offer a place of stability and kindness, something Mr. Harper had never provided. The Smiths didn't just want to own the building. They wanted to transform it into something better. And in doing so, they would soon find out just how small the world really is and how quickly the tables could turn. The day finally arrived when the Smiths became the proud owners of the building. It was a surreal moment, walking through the halls they had once been forced to leave, but now with a sense of purpose and ownership. The building was far from perfect, but the Smiths had a vision. They would fix what was broken, not just in the structure, but in the very spirit of the place. Word spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, and it wasn't long before Mr. Harper found out. His once prized property was now in the hands of the very family he had evicted years ago. Shock and disbelief washed over him as he realized who the new owners were. He couldn't believe it. How had they gone from being his tenants, struggling to make ends meet, to becoming the owners of the building? The humiliation stung. Mr. Harper, who had once felt so secure in his wealth and power, now found himself in a position of weakness. He had lost everything: the building, his tenants, and his pride. He tried to ignore it at first, hoping it would all go away, but the truth was undeniable. The Smiths, the very people he had cast aside, were now in charge. In an act of desperation, Mr. Harper approached the Smiths, hoping for a way out, some form of mercy. He tried to offer them a deal, a way to buy back the building or work out a compromise, but the Smiths were resolute. They had suffered too much, and they weren't about to let him off the hook so easily. With calm but firm words, Mr. Smith reminded Mr. Harper of the eviction, the cold indifference, and the way he had treated their family. "We're not here to make deals," he said. "We're here to fix what you broke." And with that, the tables had truly turned. With the building now in their hands, the Smiths wasted no time in making it their own. They set to work immediately, focusing not just on the physical repairs, but on rebuilding the heart of the place. The building, once neglected and run down, began to take on a new life. Broken windows were replaced, peeling paint was refreshed, and the once dingy hallways began to sparkle. But the true transformation wasn't just about fixing the walls, it was about creating a space where people could feel safe, respected, and valued. The Smiths decided to introduce a new philosophy to the building, one that was built on fairness, kindness, and community. Rent prices would be kept affordable, maintenance requests would be handled promptly, and tenants would be treated with dignity, something Mr. Harper had never bothered to do. They took the time to meet with each tenant, listening to their concerns and making changes that would improve everyone's living situation. It wasn't long before the neighborhood began to notice. The tenants, who had long been afraid of speaking up or asking for help under Mr. Harper's rule, started to breathe easier. They were no longer just renters. They were part of a community, and that sense of belonging brought a new energy to the building. The Smiths had turned what had been a place of misery into a place of hope. As they worked, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. This wasn't just a victory over Mr. Harper, it was a victory for all the families who had ever been mistreated, for every person who had ever been overlooked. The Smiths had proven that integrity, hard work, and compassion could build something far stronger than greed and selfishness ever could. The building was no longer just a symbol of what they had lost, it was a symbol of what they had gained: a new beginning, a new chapter, and a community that would thrive because of the choices they made. The past was behind them, and the future looked brighter than ever. Meanwhile, Mr. Harper's situation continued to spiral downward. The once thriving landlord had now become a shadow of his former self. The building he had once taken pride in was no longer his. His tenants had left, his finances were in ruin, and the luxury lifestyle he had once flaunted was slipping away. What he hadn't realized, in his pursuit of profit, was that people weren't just tenants, they were individuals, with lives and stories. The very community he had neglected was now thriving under the Smiths' leadership, while his empire crumbled. The weight of his decisions hit him hard. He had made mistake after mistake, chasing wealth without caring for the people who helped build it. His investments had failed, and his arrogance had alienated everyone who had once been loyal to him. The building he had sold for a quick profit was now a constant reminder of his downfall. It was as if the universe had turned its back on him, punishing him for his greed. As the months went by, Mr. Harper found himself with fewer and fewer options. His wealth had evaporated, and the network of contacts he had relied on was no longer there. He tried to sell off more properties, but no one was buying. The market had shifted, and people no longer trusted a landlord like him. One day, he stood in front of the now renovated building, watching as the Smiths worked with their tenants, making improvements and talking to the people who lived there. A pang of regret struck him. He realized that in his pursuit of money, he had lost everything that truly mattered. He had never seen the value in kindness, in building relationships, or in helping others. Now, those things were the very things that had brought the Smiths success, while he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. He was forced to leave the city, his wealth and pride reduced to dust. But as he packed up and left, the thought of the smith's success lingered in his mind. They had taken what he had discarded and turned it into something beautiful. In the end, it wasn't money or power that had won, it was heart. And that was something Mr. Harper would never get back. As time went on, the Smiths' impact on the building and the neighborhood grew. The changes they had made weren't just physical. They had brought a sense of unity and respect to the entire community. The tenants, who had once felt isolated and voiceless, now felt empowered. They no longer feared their landlord or lived in uncertainty. Instead, they had someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. The Smiths were no longer just the owners of a building, they were leaders, mentors, and friends to the people who lived there. They organized community events, helped families when they were struggling, and always listened to the needs of their tenants. Word spread beyond the building, and soon people from other parts of the city began to take notice. The Smiths' approach to managing their property was something the community hadn't seen before: fairness, transparency, and compassion. Neighbors who had once been distant began to stop by, offering support and showing appreciation for what the Smiths had done. The families in the building felt a new sense of pride. They had been part of something bigger than themselves, and the transformation was evident in the way they interacted with each other. Where there had once been tension, there was now cooperation and understanding. The Smiths had created a true community, a place where people helped each other, where everyone was valued, and where kindness was the foundation of everything. And as the building continued to flourish, so did the people within it. The Smiths didn't just change the building, they changed the lives of everyone who lived there. They had taken something broken and turned it into something whole, something that stood as a testament to the power of resilience, hard work, and, most of all, heart. The community they had built was now a beacon of hope, showing others that kindness and perseverance could overcome even the most difficult of circumstances. As they stood together in the heart of the building, surrounded by grateful tenants and new friends, the Smiths knew they had done more than just right or wrong. They had created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. As the Smiths looked around at the thriving community they had built, it became clear to them that the real reward wasn't the property or the wealth they had gained. It was the relationships, the respect, and the trust they had earned. Their journey wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about showing the world that compassion, integrity, and hard work could create something far more valuable than any amount of money or power. Mr. Harper's story, on the other hand, was a cautionary tale. His downfall wasn't just about losing his wealth, it was about losing his humanity in the pursuit of profit. His greed had blinded him to the real value of people, and in the end, it was the Smiths, with their values of fairness and kindness, who succeeded where he had failed. The Smiths had learned that no matter how hard life may seem, there is always a way to rise above it. It's not about how much you have or how many setbacks you face, it's about the choices you make and the way you treat others along the way. They had faced hardship, but they had never lost their sense of hope, their sense of community, or their belief in doing what was right. In the end, their story wasn't just about buying a building, it was about showing the world that no matter where you start, or what you face, you can always make a difference. The power of perseverance, compassion, and the will to do good can transform not just your own life, but the lives of those around you. And so, the Smiths' journey became a reminder to us all: kindness and integrity are the true measures of success. When you choose to act with heart, even in the toughest of times, you have the power to change the world. If you've enjoyed this story and found inspiration in the Smiths' journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness and the strength of the human spirit. Together, we can make the world a better place, one story at a time.